I'm glad to welcome you. I'm Scott Corwin. I pastor the International Baptist Church in Berlin, and I'm also serving as the Building Connections Core Strategy Director for the time being. I'm kind of on the way out, but lingering for a while. And I'm happy to put together this evening. It came out of a conversation that I don't know how it actually got started. Maybe Robert and I started the conversation because we just after one of our discussions started talking about the need for how do we find Christian counselors? How do we care for people in our churches and refer people? And I reached out to Ingo, a friend of mine from Berlin, and then the result is this. So tonight, I'm really happy to welcome Ingo. Ingo's I would describe him as a Texan German. He's born in Germany, married, saw the light and married a Texas girl, and was in Texas for a number of years, where he actually was a director of a church-based counseling center. Moved to Berlin, where I met him 2008 through 2017. They were here and just a fantastic resource for us and good friends. They were serving in a bivocational counseling and coaching and consulting ministry here. And now he is a professor at Regent University, where he is working with leadership program there. So I reached out to Ingo and asked him if he would help us during this time sort of answer some questions about self-care and how we might best equip ourselves, and we might even get some opportunity to talk a little bit about some of our other interests as well. So Ingo, I'm really delighted that you're here. Appreciate your willingness and your availability to help us kind of sort through some of these things. An invitation to self-care, care for the caregivers. So welcome, Ingo, and thanks for being willing to do this.
Thanks, Scott. Always a pleasure. I was so happy we reconnected a little bit because sometimes you leave a city, and even though technology allows for it, life gets busy, and then you lose connection with good brothers and friends. So that was actually the kind of a highlight, like, oh, there's an email from Scott. Cool. So yeah, I'm very happy to talk about this topic with you. I want to have a conversation with you on this, as I think it doesn't only pertain to us ourselves, it pertains to everyone we meet. Like, how do we treat ourselves well? And how do we bring that into some sort of integrative view with our biblical worldviews, and maybe find ways to turn this into better redemptive journeys for all of our lives. The quality of life is important, I think. You are all pastors and leaders, and I sometimes look at the lives of pastors and leaders, including my own life, and I'm asking myself, am I living in a way that somehow this might be attractive for somebody to look at Christ? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is this life somehow an invitation? How would you answer that? Mm. Or am I living this raggedy, run dry life with the tank almost always empty? And find myself inviting other people to live like me. No, thank God, a good theology would always point to Christ and away from us. But yet we are the representatives so much. People look at, say, like, is this a life that somebody may want to live? So I do have some things I want to share with you, some slides I want to share with you. I think I have the ability to share my screen. So I'm going to share a few things here with you. And you should be able to see, you're going to see my head bobbing left and right because I'm working on different screens. But I always look at self-care as something complex. I think simplistic answers often fail us. Just do this new diet or do this really radically. We tend to fall for simplistic answers. It seems like the culture demands it to some degree, but I would like to warn us to get a bit overly too simplistic. Now, in my experience, I've worked with pastors and missionaries for over 25 years. And so in my experience, my own and my counseling experience, most pastors and missionaries and leaders are very compassionate people. They care. They care for the people that God has entrusted them with. But that care can also be dangerous. And I'll speak on that in a minute here. Somebody randomly said on social media, stop setting yourself on fire to warm others. That's kind of like, ouch. It's like, hey, let me warm you and I'm going to give it all. And I'm not Jesus, but I am just Ingo. And so setting myself on fire might produce some temporary heat for somebody that warms them. But, I don't want to take this metaphor too far. We can look at it spiritually, theologically. There are people who set themselves on fire to give a message out. I don't think we have to go there. And so as someone who's run some marathons in his life, I always look at what pace do I need to run to sustain this race so I can actually finish it. And that is something that is not so easy to do. Multiple reasons make us go faster. A good buddy of mine always had a bit of anxiety when he was running marathons. I'm going to name him Karim. Good buddy of mine. We joke about it. He always used to, in our younger years, he used to go in the first row with the Kenyans. He would line up with the Kenyans in the first row of the marathon, knowing he was actually pretty fast. I was running around a 3:20 marathon. He was running under 3 hours a few times. But to line up with the Kenyans, he would line up with the Kenyans, go all out for 15K, and then he would die. And I would catch up with him and we run together, But there is such a thing as not knowing how to calibrate my pace. Like, I don't know where do I need to put myself, in what line do I need to go. I always put myself in the 4-hour line, and then I was kind of okay with trying to pick up a little bit, maybe a little faster than that. But sometimes when you go out too fast, you can't finish. We see that a lot. People start out with intense enthusiasm, and 15 years later, they hope if I had the money, I would leave the ministry. I've heard that many, many, many times. If I had the cash, I would maybe not do this anymore. Okay. So objective number one today in this conversation with it, maybe hopefully no longer than 10-minute PowerPoint, I want to talk more with you, but maybe we can stop setting ourselves on fire to warm others. I know that I don't want to stretch this metaphor too much, or that picture too much, but it's something we have to look at. The other thing is that Toffler said this, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. It's like we have to be in a constant process as leaders to be okay with unlearning things and maybe relearn it, even though I would immediately say that is not an easy thing to do. If you're expecting 180-degree changes, I would like to destroy that today and say, don't do that to yourself. Don't expect 180-degree changes. If we can do 5-6 degrees of change, hallelujah, thank you, Lord. The rest will happen when we die and go to heaven. Okay, but having unrealistic expectation kills a lot of ambitions and a lot of things. So objective number 2, permission to target a few items for realistic reprogramming. And that is very individual. For you, I see some couples here. For you as an individual, of course, that's where it matters the most. But of course, couples can also talk about how do we live this life, and can we sustain this? Is this a pace we can sustain and not become numb? Because all the compassion, all the love for people, all the love for God can grow weary and numb at some point, just because we're teetering on burnout. And that's not a diagnosis so much as it is, symptomatology of many things coming together, where we just don't have it anymore to sustain just minimum work. I deal with burnout and missionaries and pastors on a ministry level, mostly on Saturday mornings, where I do some ministry work still, and it's just very common. My sister just went through a huge burnout, and in the German system, thank God, there is a way to treat that, to deal with that. In the American system, you just get replaced. There's not much there's not much room there for dealing with real issues. So you have to just be a bit more careful. But in the German system, you have the Hamburger Modell. You have a way to kind of stay away. You can do Krankschreibung. At some point, it is covered. And at some point, then you can ease into it with the Hamburger Modell. This is one of the things I usually suggest. So if somebody here is dealing with burnout or that, there are ways in Germany definitely to deal with that. In other places, I know it's very different from country to country, and in America, it's different from company to company, church to church, and state to state almost, But to say what I said earlier, I want to make sure this is not something we you're not going to get from me the 3 steps to overcome or to self-care today. Because I really believe it's very individualistic. It's like, I don't know what you need because I don't know your story. I don't know your pre-existing conditions in a sense. Like what are you coming into this with, this thinking about self-care? Do you even allow yourself biblically or intellectually to approach this topic? So there is a measure of complexity, and I don't want to end up here making it too complex, but I want to address it at least. Like some that I work with, most people I work with come from Christian circles of some sort of Christian background. So the question always is, how do we navigate a biblical view of life where sacrifice is actually a given? The sacrifice concept is given. If you look at leadership theory, for example, there is such a thing as servant leadership. It's not yet a full-fledged theory, but it's getting there. And it is very much, when I teach leadership classes here at Region, my students love that. It's like, I'm a servant leader. It's like, well, hold on. Maybe you're a transactional leader as well sometimes, where you just have to deal with transactions. Maybe you are a transformational leader really at heart. And maybe it's some sort of eclectic kind of variety of leadership theories that you apply, you don't even know it. So I'll have them dig a little deeper, but most Christians, most leaders have to deal with, what is my biblical view of this leadership, and how does self-care fit into this? I would invite you to look into that and say, do you have a foundation for this or a concept for this? Because if you don't, you're going to feel guilty to even take an extra nap, even if you need it. And you may have people calling and emailing and knocking on the door saying, I need to talk to the pastor or the pastor's wife. If you are a 2-for-1, like in many churches that is the case, 1 gets paid, 2 get to work. It's, there's all kinds of demands that are definitely on pastors and leaders that are different than just quote unquote being a parishioner. So you have that extra dimension of expectation usually coming at you. And somehow we need to educate our parishioners, and we need to educate people how to take care of themselves as well, so we don't become the go-to source for every issue there is. Okay. Some people invite that actually by trying to meet everyone's needs. And that is a sure recipe for, coming to your end rather quickly. Trendy fads, simplistic formulas, I mentioned that. We are not into just mindless self-actualization, but what are we for? What is a biblical concept of self-care? How do we not, as leaders, impose just rigid recipes? Like everybody does the Daniel plan. We have these fads and these things that comes our way, and we just send them out there to our parishioners, and everybody tries to do it, and most people don't stick with it. So I'm definitely a fan of a much gentler approach, instead of just picking up something at a conference and then throwing it out to everyone, or trying it ourselves. So I would like to have something more rooted, more organic, more natural to who you are. Because self-care, for me, is being out in nature, for example, on the water, on my bike, skiing. That's self-care to me. I love being out in nature and being active. That is torture to my wife. That is not self-care to her. Self-care to her is go to the little huts on the mountains and have a glühwein and not worry about being out in the cold. Okay, so self-care for her as a trauma survivor is very different. When she has harsh environments around her, she cringes. When I have harsh environments around me, I'm like, yeah, bring it on. Where's the next thunderstorm? Okay. So self-care is very individual and cannot be put and imposed on people. It's like, everybody do this and then everything will be fine. And then I'd like for you to ask yourself, what are your pressures on the inside and on the outside? They may differ. Most pastors they list the expectations of parishioners. People have expectations. This is what a pastor should be. This is what a children's minister should be like. They have expectations. Oftentimes they're not spoken. So if we don't define it in our churches and ministries, people will define us and will treat us accordingly. This is what you should be like. This is how you should act. And so I'm a big fan of setting the standard without it coming at us from the outside. The psychological concept here is agency. I can do things and I can influence things, and I also can set standards of what is health. And I do believe us pastoral leaders should try that. Like, let me set the standard here of what might be healthy for me, and give others the freedom to embrace some of the strategies that would work for them. But I see many ministries just try fads and books and do this, and everybody do this. If there is generic value for everyone in there somewhere, great, but what if not? So I think we need to ask the question, what is self-care to you? That's my question to you today as well. What is self-care to you? Like I just said, it's very different for my wife than it is for me. Okay. So what is self-care? Anybody want to just throw in some thoughts here? What is self-care to you is probably the better question. And do you find it legitimate to care for self? I could ask some challenging questions here. Didn't we have examples in scripture where people just die and for their faith? Is this not? So is self-care actually is it self-preservation? Is that okay? So thoughts on that, if anybody would like to share.
Yeah, I guess for me, a couple of things come to mind. The long term, the desire long term that people make it, the idea of perseverance in the scriptures as being the ultimate goal. It is a difficult question. I remember my colleague in ministry, we had new missionaries arriving, and somebody said, we need to give them a soft landing. And he said, no, 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 I'm not interested in soft landings. I'm interested that they make it and that they stick and they survive for a long time. But I think there are some generational differences too. When he came as compared to who's coming today. On the flip side, I can think of a scene like Elijah down in the dumps after the victory over the prophets of Baal, and the Lord sending an angel to make him some bread. And then he regains his strength and he's able to run. So the Lord shows examples with his own servants of tender care. I think both are true.
And this is what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping for people embracing the dualistic nature sometimes of scripture. There's a tender care, yet there's a reality that sometimes we get pushed, and it may call for a lot of sacrifice as well. So I love the way you said that, that both are true. You know, I would definitely agree with that. But what you're saying with that is there is room for that in our theology. And I think if we look at the part of God that is nourishing, that is the one that cares for us individually, there must be that room in there somewhere. We could probably spend about 2 hours right now picking this apart theologically and not going into some cheap hermeneutic and just quoting a bunch of scriptures. I do have a few here, but I'm not, you all can do that probably better, or that would be probably a seminar led by a real theologian and picking up apart some of these things. But I do think there is a biblical legitimacy to caring for self for the sake of sustenance, nourishment, redemption, healing, and being able to finish the race. And because what I see a few too many times than I care to see is pastors just wanting to get out because they're done. They're literally done. And that has many, many, many reasons. And it's very individual, but some of the repeating themes are lots of pain and hurt and physical exhaustion that comes to combine like a perfect storm and leading to major depression and the inability to function in a pastoral role. And for others, it's other things. It's panic attacks and anxiety. Those are just the common colds of mental health issues. Many people have them. So, but some conditions become so bad that they become debilitating. And that's when we know we are too late in the self-care agenda. So somehow the signs, the previous signs were ignored. Okay. Sort of like coming to a stage 4 pancreatic cancer diagnosis, knowing I've had signs and pain and I should have gone to my annual well visits and this and that. I just went to one. Some of these visits are not my favorite, but like gotta do them,
Necessary.
So I spare you the details. But anyway, so one of my favorites is "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." It's just an invitation. Lord, I need to be sitting by the quiet, to be quiet and still. And when does it ever happen? When do we ever get quiet and still so much that God can embrace us? When do we fill our silence with any noise just so we can keep going? It's definitely something I try to do by not turning on the car radio, by not turning on anything, by going out for a walk and not looking at my phone or leaving my phone at home. And it's all the things that connect us need to be disconnected at some point. I do believe that. So the role of Sabbath moments, Sabbath time, Sabbath the monthly, the ritual that you may have to induce Sabbath experiences. Frankly, in America, that's a lost art. And in Germany, I'm not sure, we might be getting there. But when do things actually stop? Truly stop. This is probably a big problem here because it constantly connects you. I get emails from students at 1:30 in the morning thinking they're going to get an answer. Really? No, they're up doing something, I don't know what, but there is no transition anymore. So I think that is certainly something, as Christians, we are well positioned to teach and live sabbatical moments, practices, and how does that happen so we don't live off the anointing from 2 years ago, but we actually get refilled. That somehow is something that I try to remind myself of a lot. And I will spare you some of the things that are happening here at the university. It's a never-ending flood of work. And so if I don't set the boundaries, it will do people in just because. Which brings me to another thing. You have to build the structure to allow for these things. The structure in your personal life and the structure in your church life, in your ministries. What are the structures that promote sabbatical moments, rituals, practices? What are they? If we don't have them, you will just get hijacked by culture and expectations and pressures from the outside. So we need to build the superstructure, like a company needs to build a structure of how products go from production to services to delivery. We have to build the structures in our ministries. How would that part of life actually be addressed, not as a sermon topic, but actually as an integrated part of who we are? Even if that means that is just you in the beginning. The culture of that has to come from the top, I believe. So is change even realistic? One of my students, she is a missionary in France, and she just proposed an incredible dissertation topic, but long story short, she'll be working on doing a phenomenological study, which is basically descriptive research based on lived experiences of people that exhibit a certain phenomenon. And she is going to actually look at people who've had persistent, intense change happen, and they have permanently kept it for 5 years or longer. Because most people go in and out of change and do not keep the change in place. So I acknowledge that. All the research said it's like we have a magnetic point and homeostatic point that kind of drags us back to a certain set point. Like I weigh 220 pounds. Yes, you can criticize that now and say like, oh, he's quite heavy. It's like, I've always been on the heavier side. Of course, it's all muscle. But having said that, is like how hard it is to get to 210. I mean, it's crazy how hard that is. For me, why is it hard? Because I'm an emotional eater. Eating is my reward and was my mother's love language. And so that holds a giant stake in my life. So will I ever be 190? Probably not. Like, does it matter? Well, it does have an impact on maybe a couple years less. I don't know. I'm quite fit on other levels. I work out a lot because I love it, but I also like to eat late at night. So how do you change that? Does it need to be changed? Do I need to make peace with that? And so permanent, persistent change is hard to come by. So I'm always looking at not this entire system of self-care. I'm asking you, is it maybe you have to return to a few things that were already existing at some point? Or is it that you have to rediscover those or discover a few new practices? What would be a 5 to 10% change for you that you could like experiment with and you could make it normal again to, for example, give yourself proper sleep? That is one of the things people don't do. They stop sleeping well, which is one staple of mental health, just normal sleep. And if you can't sleep and you have roaming thoughts or ruminating thoughts or issues, and that's an issue for counseling to like, how do I get to a peaceful sleep again? Okay. So the basics of mental health and self-care are indeed movement, nutrition, sleep, purpose, and relationships. Those are some basics, because this is how we're made, I believe, by God. But this is not a system. I'm not telling you to do a diet. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm just asking, how do these things come to play, be a part of your life? People can't be healthy if they never move, and it has an impact on many, many things in our bodies. Nutrition, oh my gosh, yes, people eat whatever they feel like sometimes. That's what is nutritious. Do you get the sleep you need? And I will not tell you you need 8 hours of sleep. Maybe you're good with 7. Some are good with 6. I used to be good with 6. I need 7.5 now. That is my cutoff. And I reevaluate that every couple of years. Like, what do I need? So ask yourself, what do you need to have a sense of self-care happening without losing sight of your ministry, without throwing out your faith, without following some guru that you pay $5,000 to get some sort of major life change happening? I don't think we need to pay money for self-care. Some of the things that may keep us from self-care may go deeper. Like if you're self-loathing or have self-hatred, then anything good for you might be you're debating with yourself if I'm even okay doing something good for me. Purpose and relationships, that goes into all arenas of our lives. We're made for relationships unless you're called to be single. How do we have healthier relationships? I never said healthy in my life because I don't think that exists on this earth. But could it be healthier? Could we have a few friends in our lives? Could we have a few people that we can be authentic with? Nothing that you've never preached on. Everyone is here has probably preached or heard somebody preach about it. It's all about, is some of this happening in my life? Okay. And then I do look, I ask people to look into deep roots. I was digging in my yard to reseed a lawn the last couple of weeks, and I found deep old roots of trees that had long been cut down. So I was tilling the ground and I found this network of tiny and big roots. Like, where is this stuff coming from? So I was pulling stuff out of the ground painfully. It was like, that's why we have so many weeds and parasitic plants growing around bushes. And there's this whole network of old stuff that's like, oh my gosh. So some stuff is very deep, and self-care also means it's okay to look at your life story and what's happened so far. What are the hurts, the losses, the habits, the coping mechanisms? Self-awareness just means, oh, God knows already all that stuff. We don't know sometimes how we function. So I encourage people to look at what are the systems that keep me sometimes in place. Habits. My father used to go jogging every morning when he was in his business years. And I used to watch him, and later I used to join him. But I used to watch him, and then I got up with him at 6 in the morning. And in Krefeld, near Cologne, it's cold in December in the mornings. And so we got up, and I would go out jogging with him. And I asked him after a year or so, Dad, I don't like to get up early in the morning. Is it ever getting easier when you get older? He said, no, son. I want to stay in bed every day. And I was like, wow. And why do you then get up? Because I benefit from it all day long when I get up. And usually after 1 kilometer of warming up, I'm okay. I just do my thing. I'm like, So I got my early running, even though I was a chubby fat kid in school, turned to be an athlete, and I got my running habits from my dad. So I don't know who taught you habits that are positive coping mechanisms. Movement has been positive for me, even though I don't run anymore or much. It's mostly biking now. So our family systems teach us habits that may hinder or help us in self-care. I don't believe it's wrong to look at those. If you have self-hatred, then look at the deeper trauma and the losses in your life, even though I acknowledge that going to counselors sometimes can be a disappointment. Not every counselor can really help you. And that also means teaching the language of self-care. That means listening to your body and to your spirit and say, what do I need today? Not every day is the same. I'm 54. Every day is a little bit different. And I will not make myself a machine expecting me to function every day. Someday it's better if I take a long nap and then go for a walk with my daughter's dog than me trying to do some sort of miles or something like that. Okay, so please be gentle to yourself, learn the language of self-care, which also means adopting God's language of care and love into your own life and say, what is it that I may need today? And then others may have to get in line. So that's very important in my view. So those are some thoughts on self-care, some principles, the complexities, not trying to make it too psychological, and also not too simplistic by just giving you a couple verses that you already know and probably preached on. But what are some thoughts here on any of these elements on self-care? I said earlier, it's permission for self-care, certainly stop setting yourself on fire, and permission to kind of address a few things for a few degrees of care as a starting point, to not feel like, oh, I tried this and it doesn't work.
Yeah, Ingo, thanks for helping set some realistic parameters, if you will. I mean, that idea of setting the pace was something very powerful. And for me, I think just the rhythms of the ebb and flow of being with community and relationship with others has led me to discover my need for being alone. By personality, I like being with people, but I find that anymore it just wears me out, and I have to really regroup by being alone and finding that nice rhythm. And one day I just sort of realized that that was something that Jesus did as well, needing to be alone, and it was okay for me. And that whole idea just was a big turn for me.
Yeah, and it's not like it was just okay for Jesus. It was the only way to connect to the Father and to pray and to regroup. And so how can you do that if we don't allow ourselves to do that? So, but yeah, the expectation sometimes is pastors are, 24/7, and Jesus himself didn't model that. Yeah. Some
other observations? Anyone? Any observations, comments?
I like the idea of sustainable change that you introduced with the 6-degree change, to Ingo. I think it's very important for us to be able to see something can be moved or made different and kept different over a longer period of time, like you described your researcher on her trip to find out which changes can last longer. So I think it's important for all of us to be able to see if I make this change, is it going to be sustainable? And judging that, I think, is going to be a tough task. But you've given us a small guideline. 6 degrees is much better than no degrees.
Yes, and if you've ever been on a sailboat, 6 degrees takes you to a whole nother place after a day on the ocean or on the Baltic Sea or whatever. So it's actually pretty cool stuff. It's just we don't look at the longevity of change or the longitudinal nature of that, where change takes us to a different place, and the rest is grace. So we don't condemn ourselves for what we haven't accomplished, but we celebrate like, wow, this is pretty cool. Thank you, Lord, for giving me something that actually has become a staple in my life that I'll do or do a little differently than maybe my family of origin or the things I learned, you know.
Yes, thank you for that. Thanks.
My son and I, and I hope that's okay, Scott, for me to mention that our ministry, we started next week. Actually, we're launching a website. It's a fundraiser website where people can bicycle to for a mental health cause, a mental health project, or for building mental health ministry structures in a country. So you can sign up and just join in. But most websites that raise funds via movement or exercise, they have this big giant event like a marathon, or they have this 1 month ride as many miles as you can kind of thing. And our approach is completely the opposite. It's about build movement into your lifestyle. We're also hoping to change the American bicycle culture with this, but like a little backdoor entrance into that. But the idea is just if you ride 5 miles, these are 5 more miles that you haven't ridden before, 5 miles a week or something like that. That is like one kind of thing you didn't do before. And that becomes normal at some point. I go, instead of getting a gallon of milk, I take my bicycle to the corner store instead of just taking the car. So there is an idea here that we want to promote. And I would like to, for a moment, just share that with you. This is the Global Cycle Club that is getting launched in a week. We're testing it right now. We're in the testing phase, in the last testing phase. And it's simply about right for a project, a country, or cause, for mental health cause, teaching care and movement and things around that. This is just the fundraiser side for C Mental Health, where we then develop open source resources that pastors and missionaries can download for their ministries, because you and I know in many countries in the world, pastors don't have $500 to spend on a mental health resource or a ministry or something like that. So we help them develop these resources with our researchers and teams of volunteers and translators to do that. So just sharing that, to just kind of, there is many ways to bring resources to people, but we first have to bring them to ourselves to say, like, are we doing a little bit of that? And in all humility, we all look to Christ for that grace, because I know how hard change is. You know, my love for ice cream will never cease, even though I have diabetes too. It doesn't matter whether this morning I got up at 6:30, did a hard workout with a group for an hour. I do that 3 times a week, and I ride bicycles. Lucas and I just bicycled through the Pacific Northwest last summer for 2,100 miles as our stubborn reaction to COVID. So we went through the mountains for 2,100 miles, just because we both love this kind of stuff, but nobody has to ride 2,100 miles. If I get somebody in America to buy a bicycle and ride for 10 miles and talk about being okay with like caring for self and doing something for yourself that they didn't do before, we have succeeded. And that's the goal. So the same principle goes for this self-care here. Don't expect everything to change. Just pick a few things. It's like, how do I can be attentive to myself, which God is anyways. I think he's attentive to you. We can take that attention, say, what is it that you're telling me, Lord? You know.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that, because I think Paul is planning a ride for us here in Berlin.
Woohoo!
We already talked a little bit about that. The other thing is that this whole idea of self-care and modeling it. I mean, disciple making at its best is apprenticing people, demonstrating and inviting them along that journey. And I think discipling people in self-care is something that we can model and guide our churches and our ministries in to help people develop better sense of mental health. And also, Ingo, thanks for sharing that other idea and concept. And Robert, this is where I think you and I might jump in and have some future conversations with Ingo, because of our interest in this particular aspect of what he's doing as well. Any other questions or comments that you would care to direct to Ingo as we begin to wrap up our time together? Any thoughts or questions that you have about self-care? Maybe even it's about some of the things he mentioned about mental health and these resource pages.
I have a question. Often the ones that I find need most help are the ones that don't think they have margin for help. So you may be talking to someone and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this person is, sounds like they're really tired, they're discouraged, whatever. Your desire is to say, I'm available, and you try to do that. And they say, well, this is exactly the time in life when I can't accept that offer. Mm-hmm. And you think, no, this is exactly what you need to do, is accept the offer. You do have time because you need somebody, and God has put me here right now, and we're having a conversation. So where would you start that conversation to help that person to see this as a help and not an additional drain?
Right. Are you speaking of fellow leaders or people that you are in charge of or supervising, or are you speaking of parishioners? Because there is a difference as to your role in this.
I think I'm probably talking of leaders, other people who have a fair amount of responsibility, and they don't feel like they can say no. They feel like it's been dictated for them. This is what is going to be expected.
Right. So when I deal with people, I used to supervise counselors in Texas. So I was supervisor for people moving towards their professional license. And so we talked about care, because sometimes people's behaviors are driven by things that are not healthy. And for Christian counselors, they're not good modeling behaviors for our clients as well. Clients notice that you are falling asleep in a session, or that you are, this has happened. Counselors fall asleep in a session. It's like, oops, sorry, I nodded off. I'm being very open with you. It happened to me one time, and I profusely apologized. And I said that you got a free session here, next session is free. I should have not have this session today with you. I was, for different reasons, not present. So pastors, leaders should develop a sense of self-awareness of how they're doing, because they will end up at the stage of, you may have no time right now, but at some point the choice may not be yours anymore. That means you have to remove them because they're ineffective or dangerous, or they remove themselves through health reasons, or just they go into burnout, or they're just not available. Burnout recovery, anywhere between 6 months to a year at least. So there's a loss of leadership here at that stage. So yes, self-awareness and self-care should be, I don't like the word dictated, but to have that conversation should be an integral part of a leadership system, that how do we do this, how do we model this, etc. So something makes them run like nonstop, whether it's a church launch You know, I've been part of church launches. That can be like we did in one church, my wife and I pastored, we did stage changes every month. So, and you know, I get very creative. I wanted a sailboat to be on the stage. So here we are assembling a sailboat and a sail at 11 o'clock Saturday night, getting ready at 1 in the morning. So I've done all the crazy stuff that I tell people not to do. I actually had fun doing it, but guess my preaching was a bit sloppy the next morning because I was just I didn't get enough sleep. We had an incredible stage though, you know. So there's a part where you have to make decisions as to really, do we need this? And my wife is the one that always calms me down and says, we don't need this. And I had other leaders that are allowed to speak into my life who said, we don't need this, Ingo. When we do foster care seminars for foster parents, which we did for 10 years as a ministry, teaching foster parents how to make sure they don't hurt their kids with special needs issues. I always want to make sure kids and parents were treated to a great spread, like a lot of good food. And until the pragmatic American in my life, Joe Williams, told me, we just need hot dogs. Stop doing this crazy stuff. He said another word, but I'm just going to say stuff right now. Okay. That's like, you have to have leaders in your team that allow others to speak into their lives. And if they don't, please check out why that is the case. There needs to be, from you or from any other leader, there needs to be that, I listen to you because it's important and I need some help on how to maybe conceptualize it or do this or deal with the fallout. Because if you have a leader step down from a few things or whatever, there's a vacuum, and sometimes people are not used to that. So I would take it to the next level, as if you have any supervisory or any influence. It's like, hey, you're not listening to me. I don't say this to control you. I say this to preserve your ministry and your family and your marriage. How many pastors have we had that have gotten divorced because the wives just had it? Just had it. We're done with this. Like, this is not a marriage anymore. It never was, because it was from day one, ministry was a mistress. So I've dealt with all of these situations. So I look for the ones that you have in your influence, or those that voluntarily come. They need to be able to pause, at least hit the pause button. Let's spend an hour. Why is there such a resistance? What do you think gets accomplished by running nonstop? Unlike Jesus did. I hit him really hard. This is not Christian ministry. This is you thinking you need to do this. Maybe it's fear of losing a job if it's not successful. Maybe it's fear of failure. Maybe it's perfectionism. I don't know. There's potential many reasons that people run themselves into the ground. Or it's people like my mother, who's 80, and she will die cleaning and cooking. I will not be able to start. She's a child of World War II. She was born in 40, and all she knows was chaos and growing up, and all she knows in her identity is work, 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 clean, 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 clean. I will not get that out of her. I physically have stopped her from cleaning and said, sit down. I'm doing this now. I'm home, and I'll take care of this. She can't sit still. 5 minutes later, she's smoking a cigarette, looking for something else to clean. So we have people with very deep issues. Those are trauma issues from World War II that have never been addressed. It's been channeled into work. By the way, that's half of Germany at least today. So we all have either moms or dads or grandparents that have kind of gone to the extremes to cope, never process anything, very little self-awareness, but they're pretty effective cleaners.
Deep roots we have, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's
it. Ingo, thanks so much. I see that as we've been talking about this and just sort of putting things together, a couple of really helpful things have come out of this that speak to us right now. But I do have to say you've raised a lot of other issues that we'll have to continue talking about at a later date. But thanks for helping us sort of wrap ourselves around this notion of self-care. It's not only good for us, but it's also good for our relationships, our families, our churches.
Yeah.
And it's also something that is a part of our journey of following Jesus.